So you wanna be a picture book writer, then you gotta write picture books. And you're gonna need a bucket load of bright ideas for titles, plots, and hooks. If you're partial to prose or you're raring to rhyme, then repeat after me. It's a challenge, but I'm gonna tackle each story 1 month at a time with 12 by 12.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the 12 by 12 Picture Book Podcast. I'm Julie Hedlund, published picture book author and founder of 12 by 12. But what you might not know about me is that I am also a co founder of something called the Complete Picture Book Submission System. And today, my guest is Emma Walton Hamilton, who not only is a co founder with me of the Complete Picture Book Submission System, but she is a best selling, award winning author, a number one New York Times bestseller in her with her mother, Julie Andrews' Very Fairy Princess series. Together, she and her mother have authored more than 35 books for children. And Emma is also a professor of children's literature at Stony Brook University. And she is a Bridport Prize winning poet. Her poetry collection, Door to Door, was published by Andrews McNeil. She has so much experience with writing and teaching, but also editing, because Emma is also an amazing freelance editor. But relevant to our discussion today, Emma is whiz bang at critiquing queries and pitches, so much so that I call her the query whisperer. And that was sort of how we got started working on complete picture book submission systems. So, as you know, we are at the beginning of a year here, and if you're listening sometime down the road, we know people are always interested in talking about submissions and how to get busy agents and editors' attention with your submission. So, Emma, would you like to share what you think the most important aspect of a picture book submission is?
Absolutely. And thank you for that lovely introduction, Julie. I'm exhausted hearing all of the things that I do. So, without question, the single most important aspect of submissions is the pitch. And the pitch is part of your query. It is something that you sometimes do in person if you have the opportunity to meet with an agent or editor at a conference, let's say, one-on-one or in a group. And it is the thing that is going to make or break your submission. It is the thing that is going to help determine whether or not an agent or an editor chooses to read your manuscript or not. And what many people don't realize is in most cases, at most literary agencies, the query is pre-screened typically by an agent's assistant. Before it actually reaches the agent's desk, it has been pre-screened in what is commonly referred to in the industry as the slush pile by an assistant who is typically tasked with separating the wheat from the chaff, for lack of a better expression. And by that, I mean weeding out anything that is immediately, obviously, easily dismissible. And while these assistants may not have the same skills of discernment as the agent themselves, or the same ability to look past something that may be a little bit rough around the edges or what have you, what they do have is they have the ability to know what's not working. And so anything that is too long, too verbose, riddled with mistakes, that in any way is sort of an easy and obvious, nope, I'm not going to pass that on, is what they'll be looking out for. So this is where you really want your pitch to be so shiny and compelling that the assistant cannot refuse passing it along to the agent. And then, of course, that it will capture the agent's imagination and eye in the same way. And it is probably the most challenging part of crafting a submissions package, polishing that pitch. But when you get it right, it can make all the difference in the world.
That's right. And I want to tie our conversation today back to the conversation I had in last week's episode with KT literary agent Adria Getz, who said that right now, anyway, the market is looking for character driven, plot driven, meaning characters with stories who act upon their stories, they have agency. But she also said that editors are looking for marketing hooks, which is different from the pitch, but they're looking for ways that your book can appeal to a wide audience. And it doesn't have to be because your book is, say, about trucks and dinosaurs, right? Which are two common hooks. But you have to be creative, especially if you have a story that perhaps is a little bit more niche. You have to be creative about finding those hooks and bringing them forward in the pitch. So, before we dig into that a little bit more, I wondered, Emma, if you might give our standard formula for a good pitch.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
everybody, if you have a pen, you can write this down, but it will also be in the show notes. In the complete picture book submission system, we give you like 7 templates to play around with, but there's one that we kind of consider the Uber template that you can really use to make sure you have all the elements of the pitch. So, Emma?
Right. And I should be clear and say that this is a template for narrative fiction and nonfiction. That's really what this is structured for. And it is pretty much no fail. If you have these elements in this order, more or less, you should have a strong pitch. And so here is, and the way I like to think of this template is kind of like if anybody remembers the Mad Libs of old, of yore, right? Remember those games that we used to play where you would fill in the blank with an adjective or a noun or a verb of your choice. So think of this as kind of the Mad Lib of pitch templates, where you're going to fill in the blanks, by which I mean the specifics of your manuscript with the generic elements that I'll be referencing. So here is the template. Hero, by which I mean main character or protagonist, and that's where you fill in the blank with your main character, wants goal, right? What do they want? They want some objective, some goal, plus obstacle or problem. What's in their way of getting that goal? Fill in the problem, fill in the obstacle, fill in the thing that they're fighting against, equals pitch, right? Or equals theme, I should actually say, equals takeaway. So this is the template: hero plus goal times problem slash obstacle equals theme or takeaway. Okay, and that's your pitch right there in a nutshell. That's the general structure of your pitch. Now, within that, can you play with it a little bit? Of course, and you want to. You want to fill it in with some voice, and you want to make it very specific to your manuscript. So you don't want to just say, you know, Jerry wants to be a fairy princess, right? You might want to say Jerry wants more than anything in the world to be a very fairy princess, or something that gives it some voice from your manuscript. But the general idea is that those are the main ingredients. Those are the touchstones or the scaffolding that you want to frame your pitch with, right? If you have those ingredients, those elements, then how you kind of finesse the language in between them is up to you. But that will be the
Yeah.
formula for your pitch.
So in action, like I'm just thinking off the top of my head of a book that whose pitch I could just write right now, and
Yeah.
the one that comes to mind is Shay Bob by Bob Shay. So already, if you haven't read it, it's very funny and very commercial and all the things that I think editors and agents are looking for right now. But the basic pitch would be Bob is an alligator. Bob the alligator is hungry and he wants to eat the birds. Okay. But he's lazy. So he doesn't want to hunt.
Do the work.
He doesn't want to do the work. So he sets up a restaurant on a bird seed restaurant on his nose, snout. I don't know what you would call it. Um, so that his dinner will come to him, only to learn that friendship may be tastier than, something along those lines, right?
Right,
And
exactly.
so we're not saying exactly how Bob has this change of heart about the birds. And if I were to sit here for a few
And we're
minutes,
not revealing the ending,
we're
right?
not
Very
revealing the
important.
ending. We're saying and I could sit here and spend time and write a much better pitch for that book, but at its core, that's what that book is. And so once you get the core of the book, then you can play with words and you can finesse and bring in more vernacular from the story and whatnot. But
And this is specific to what Adria was saying in your conversation, because when you've got your hero, that's your character, that's the part that where she was talking about character driven. And then, plot is all about conflict. It's all about obstacles getting in the way of a pursuit of a goal, right? So that's the key element. And then with the pitch, once we've established who the hero is, what they're in pursuit of and what's in their way, so we understand what the tension is, what the conflict is in the story, then we want to just leave them with the takeaway or the theme, not give away the ending, because if we give away the ending plot wise in the pitch, then there's no reason to read the manuscript, right? So the idea with the pitch, the goal of the pitch is really to pique the agent or editor's interest and make them want to read the book. It's not to synopsize the book, right? That's a different thing. A synopsis is different from a pitch. A synopsis is where you tell us briefly exactly what happens in the story from beginning, middle to end. But a pitch is where you give us the basic ingredients and then you tease what the reader's going to learn and take away from this story without telling us the how, without telling us how you get there, so that the agent or the editor says, well, this sounds intriguing. Now I have to read it to find out how they got there,
mm-hmm.
to find out what happened. And that's the plot piece, right? That's the other half of what Adria was talking about is so
Yeah.
important these days.
Yeah. So, one thing that we do, as in you and I, we critique a lot of pitches and queries as part of the complete picture book submission system. We have a community that you get access to for 6 months. And by the way, I guess I should back up for a minute and just say what the system is. I mean, it kind of, its name is somewhat self-explanatory, but the complete picture book submission system is a self-paced course that starts with who do you submit to and how do you research them? How do you find who you're going to submit to? Do you want to submit to an agent or an editor or a big agency or a boutique agency? And then how do you find them and how do you find the people who are a fit for your work, right? And then we go into the query letter, every single component, intro, pitch, comp titles, bio, conclusion. We have a whole unit or a whole module where we critique query letters and pitches, and then we tell you do's and don'ts. We give you all the formatting that you could ever want for any type of manuscript, whether you're submitting it by email or query manager or even snail mail, believe it or not. And then we walk you through the types of responses that you get. And once you get a deal, which you will if you don't give up, then we go through how to read your contracts, what questions to ask, and then ultimately how to set yourself up for success. So we call it a soup to nuts submission system because it carries you all the way through the process.
It
And
also answers every single question
that's right.
anybody might have. One of the things that we say is if your question is not answered in this system, send it to us and we'll answer it and include it in the next update. And we
Right.
update it every year. So it really, there are over 75 questions in the FAQs that we answer, and it really does answer every single question you could ever have about submitting.
Right. So what we do is in the community Facebook group, and then once a month we have coaching calls and live pitching critiques. So we'll critique people's pitches. And I thought we could spend a few minutes talking about some of the mistakes that we see most commonly.
Yeah.
And one thing that I would start with is not so much a mistake, but something for you all to really think about when you're writing your pitches. You have such a small amount of real estate for that pitch. It really can't be more than 3 sentences, unless it's like complex nonfiction for an older audience. And even then, you know, so you want to make sure that everything is working for you in that pitch, including your title. So we just talked about Shea Bob. What if that book was titled Bob and the Birds? It changes everything, right?
Or Bob the alligator.
Or Bob the Alligator, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot, I mean, yes, titles change when you go through the publishing process, but I think if people started thinking of your titles as part of your pitch, it as part of how the agent or editor is going to see where this book belongs in the market,
Right.
that would help. Then you
Shea
all
Bob is such a brilliant title, not just because the author's name is Bob Shea, which, is half the fun, but just because it in 2 words we get so much information, you
right,
know. It's just
an
it tells
alligator
us that
who
it's
opens a restaurant.
yeah, it tells us it's a restaurant story. It tells us it has a sense of humor, just the juxtaposition of Shay, which is a fancy word, suggesting a fancy restaurant, and Bob, which is such a simple name, and doesn't lend itself to Shay, the French, version. So it
Right.
already we know this is a humorous story and that it has restaurant overtones or a theme of restaurants, and probably an amusing main character.
Right. Another example would be We Do Not Eat Our Classmates
Right.
by Ryan T. Higgins. Much more compelling than Penelope the dinosaur goes to school,
Right.
you know? So I really want to, and titles are hard. I really I really struggle with titles myself, but it's worth spending some time really thinking about it because your title is part of your pitch. It's a tool that you're going to use to convey information about your story. And if it's clear enough, then
It's
you
sort of
don't
the
think,
first piece of information.
right, right.
It's the first thing an agent or editor is going to see in connection to your story, probably. It's the first
Yeah,
thing that's going to jump out at them, and it automatically will color what comes next.
yeah. And another mistake that we see very often is not being clear in the pitch whose story is being told.
Right.
So
Who's
Emma,
the hero?
do you want to talk a little bit about um, why that is, because it seems pretty simple that we would know who our main character is. So why do we find this ambiguity so often, do you think?
Well, sometimes, quite often in picture books, of course, a main character is engaged in some conflict with another character or other characters. And, authors feel compelled to make sure that they've included all the characters in the pitch that are in the story, which you do not need to do. And also to name other characters in the pitch, which you also do not necessarily need to do, right? So again, this is all about economy. As Julie said, 3 sentences is the goal, right? And every single word has to earn its right to be there in that pitch. So you don't want to waste any real estate on a secondary character who isn't really central to the action of the story, or mentioning names of characters who show up in one scene or right at the end, or or just who have really ancillary roles. And what happens when you do is it becomes confusing as to whose story this is. Is this if we go back to Shay Bob for a moment, and we structured the pitch as from the bird's point of view, right? When a group of birds sees a pleasing assortment of seeds laid out in a nice array on a tablecloth, or what, I'm just um, riffing here, but they quickly discover that now all of a sudden the book is about the birds, and it's from the bird's point of view, not Bob's, right? So really think carefully about who your main character is, whose story this is, who has the emotional journey of change in the story, right? Who is it that starts out in one way or pursuing one thing and ends up at the story someplace different than when they began? Unless, of course, they're a flat art character, which is a thing unto itself.
Well,
And
I was just going to say, we'll have to have you come back. We can't talk about all aspects of
no, we
pitching
can't.
today,
But whose
but
story is it is the key. And then don't burden your pitch with too many extra characters, right? Only the ones that are absolutely essential to the central conflict, to the central action of the story, right? You don't need to mention the others. If they'll find out all those other characters when they read the manuscript, but what they really want to know is whose emotional journey of change is it in this story? Who is it that is the readers is going to step into their shoes and take that journey alongside them?
right, right. And the way we see this playing out is a lot of times it will start with a character, and then there's a mention of another character, and then we're kind of head hopping over there. So I'm just going to make up an example, right? Max wants to help his friend Joey feel better while he's in the hospital. But Joey doesn't want visitors, because he doesn't feel well.
Right.
And so Joey starts writing letters to Max so that Max doesn't feel like he's not a friend anymore. Well, okay, who's you can see
Is
the
it Max's
confusion,
story
right?
or is it Joey's
Right,
story?
like you can see the confusion, and you can also see how easy it is to make that mistake, because you're coming at the pitch from the perspective of what happens in the book rather than the core journey, the core essence from the main character's point of view. So
Right.
again, Emma said this earlier on, it's not about what happens in the book or how it happens. It's a teaser of who the character is, their central conflict, and what they
The
learn.
theme, yeah, the
Yeah.
theme or the takeaway.
And by learning, we don't mean didactic messages. You
Right.
you
No.
can learn in a picture book by your experience, which is honestly how most people learn, right? Um, so that is the essence of a pitch. And we could talk about this all day long, but we do want to get you on your way. We,
Julia, I just want to piggyback on that. I want to add one thing before we wrap up, and that is the one of the other biggest mistakes we see in the in the pitches that we critique is lack of voice.
mm,
And this is, I think, so important and so overlooked because we tend to think of the query as a business letter, right? And so because it's a business letter with a business format and a certain structure where there's the pitch paragraph and then the comps and then the bio and that, that we have this structure that we're following and it's formatted like a business letter and business formal, then we make the mistake of writing the pitch in business formal. And the again, remember that the job of the pitch is to pique the agent or editor's interest and want them in making them want to read the manuscript. It's also to show them that you write well and that you understand what it is to write for children and specifically for picture book age children, right? No way on earth can you do that if you're writing only in adult business formal, right? That does not tell the agent or editor anything about your ability to write a picture book. It tells them you know how to write a business letter, but it doesn't tell them you know how to write a picture book. So the pitch exists in its own universe when it comes to voice, right? You should be able to lift that pitch right up out of the query letter and have it exist in its own voicey world. Whereas the rest of the query can function in business formal. All the stuff about who you are and what your comps are and all of that, that's fine, business formal, and it should be business formal, respectful, quick, the information in and out, and be mindful of the agent or editor's time. But the pitch needs to capture the voice of your manuscript. The pitch needs to not only capture your plot, your theme, your main character, but it also needs to capture some semblance of the spirit, tone, or voice of your manuscript. And the best way to do that is to draw from the manuscript itself, to choose some select words or phrasing that you literally lift from your manuscript narrative and weave that into the pitch to give the agent or editor a sense of the flavor, of
mhm,
the style, of the tone, of the spirit of your manuscript.
yeah. And one last thing about the pitch, you have to show why your book would be loved by children.
Yeah.
Because that's
Where's the
another
resonance
mistake.
for
It's
children?
another mistake that people make is they're sort of writing to the adult as to why this book is important. Whereas the pitch is really the place where you're proving that this book would be really resonant with children. And so that's another common mistake. Now, we have to end here, but we do have more help for you. Emma and I created a free resource training and it's quite extensive. It goes into how to research an agent, why traditional publishing is probably what you want to do with picture books, and how to write a great pitch. So if you go to picturebooksubmissions.com /free training, you can sign up and grab that training and it will give you a lot more information about pitching. Again, that's picturebooksubmissions.com /free training, and we will have this in the show notes. Also, we are in the middle of 12 by 12 registration right now. It is going to end very soon on February 15th. And if you want to join a community of like minded people who are working on the craft of picture books and submitting picture books and um, writing queries and pitches and manuscripts, then 12 by 12 is the perfect place for you. And you can join us at 12by12 12xchallenge.com. So that's 12x12challenge.com/membership. All right. So thank you so much, Emma, for being here.
My pleasure.
I'm sure we'll be having you back for more conversations about submissions. All right. Ciao for now, everybody.
Do it together so never you fear. It's a handy little way to help you kick into gear. You're amazing, exciting. Look out, 'cause you're writing 12 by 12.
12 manuscripts.
12 by 12.
12 picture books.
12